Only the chemists in the room. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight, some of these big amudim, and we're going to be learning. We're starting at the bottom of Nun Beis Amud Aleph at the two dots. We're about 15 lines or so from the bottom at Nish Beis Chayv Liftosa. We'll be learning today about 2/3 of the way down on Nun Gimel Amud Beis, and we're going to have to move quickly. Quite a bit of material here. The Gemara says Nish Beis Chayv Liftosa, that if a man's wife gets captured, he has an obligation to redeem her. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis teach us in a brisa. Nish Beis B'chaye Baila Ba'achar Kach Meis Baila. If she was captured in the lifetime of the husband, and after she was captured, he died. So if he kirba Baila, if he knew about the fact that she was captured in his lifetime, Yorshin Chayav Liftosa, then the obligation, his heker, his knowledge of her having been captured is enough of a reason to pass on that obligation to the Yorshin, and then they are chayav and liftosa. Lo hikir ba'bayla, even if she was captured during his lifetime, but he didn't know about it, and then he died. Ein Yorshin chayav liftosa, then the halacha does not pass on to the Yorshin. And Levi thought this was the din. Levi savar lemeh uvda ki hamas nisa. He wanted to paskin like this Mishnah, and when he was about to do so, Amar le Rav said, Hachi Amar Chavivi, my beloved one. Rashi says that this is talking about his uncle Rav Chia. Hachi Amar Chavivi leis hilchasaki hamas nisa. The halacha is not like this Mishnah that it depends on the das of the husband during his lifetime. Ella ki hadatanya. What does the next brisa say? 7 8 lines from the bottom. Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Nish Beis. If a woman was captured after her husband's death, then there is no need for the orphans to redeem his wife. Again, we're talking about a stepmother, not an actual mother, obviously. It says the Gemara, not only that, even if it were to have been that he knew about it, or I should say that she was captured while he was alive, and what is the rationale for this? Because I cannot say about her because she's never going to be brought back to the husband because the husband died. And because they can't be brought back into the marriage, so the t'nai of the ksuba of redeeming her, as we learned about the other day, that t'nai falls apart. And therefore, there's no obligation to redeem the stepmother because there's no husband to bring her home to. Again, it sounds very cold. That's it's, like they say, like there's a kal to litvak, So like the Gemara is not friendly about it. But a little colder than a kal litvak. But that's what the Gemara says, is that there's no obligation to save the stepmother. Depends who this. Okay, let's go. So then the Gemara says 3 lines from the bottom. Tanu Rabban and Nishbeis. Let's say that a woman was captured, and then all of a sudden there's a ransom demand. You get the voice change on the phone, and it's giving you this electronic voice that's saying we want 10 times the cost of your wife. And of course, we would do this math based on how much this wife would have been worth as a shivcha, and then we multiply by 10. That was their demand. She's worth 500 zuz. I want 5,000 zuz. So what's the din? Pam rishona poda. If the first time she's captured this way, so then you have to pay. You have to pay whatever the demand is, even 10 times more. Mikan va'elech ratza poda, ratza ena poda. Then it's up to him. What's the reason for this? Because you don't negotiate with terrorists. Once they see that there is this benefit of every time they steal a Yiddish medal, then they get to get as much money as they want. So the Gemara says that's not acceptable. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel argues on this. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, turning to the top of Nun Beis Amud Beis, ein podenes hashivuyin yoser al kadei dmehen mibnei tikun ha'olam. We don't even give more than their actual value. Forget the 10 times. Even the 10 times we don't have to do. The halacha is mibnei tikun olam. Rashi, Dibra Maskal Mibnei Tikun Ha'olam, Shalo Yargilu Lahalos Al Dmein. So people don't make a habit out of doing this. What's implied from this shita of Reb Shimon and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? So Rashbag says, the implication of the Rashbag on Nun Beis Amud Beis second line is Habichdei Dmehen Podin and Afal Gav to Bigdoni Yoser al Ksubasa. That yes, we are obligated to pay, even if it's 200 zuz, that's how much they want, and that's how much our ksuba is worth. So the halacha is that even if it's going to be the same as, even if it's going to be more than her ksuba, whatever it is, the halacha is that we have to redeem her. The problem is that Rashbag elsewhere said something different. Uriminhi, there's another brisa. That if a woman was captured and the ransom note says we want 10 times her value, the first time you're obligated to redeem her no matter what. And any other subsequent time when she's captured and they make the same demand, it's optional if you choose to redeem her. And now Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in a very similar brisa. Now what does he say here? Rashbag Omer, It's based on the ksuba amount, not based on the pidyon amount. So let's say they say that her ksuba is 200 zuz. They want 500 zuz. It seems in the previous price that they'd have to pay, but in this price, because it's more than a ksuba, she's not obligated. So which Rashbag is considered correct? Says the Gemara, Rashbag, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Trey Kule Isla. He's got a double leniency. They have to both be an amount of money that is either, it has to be an amount of money that is worth her value, and it has to be equal or lesser than the cost of the ksuba. Anything that breaks either of those two rules, the halacha is, according to Rashbag, you don't have to redeem even your own wife, even with the Tanai ksuba, then that would not be an obligation. The Gemara says 10, 12 lines down in Beis and Beis at the two das. The Gemara speaks about laksa chayv b'refua, that if a woman becomes ill, the husband is obligated to pay for her medical bills. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanim. The rabbis teach us in a brisa. Almana, if there's an almana, a widow, nizonis minichse yisomen, v'tzricha refuah harehi kimizonos. So she gets fed from the nichse yisomen, and a person who needs refuah harehi kimizonos, that's considered to be like food. It's like regular sustenance, just like you'd give your wife bread, water, meat, whatever the case is. She also needs penicillin and Tamiflu and whatever else she needs. You got to feed her. You got to take care of her. Rashbag Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer refuah sheyesh la kitzva. If the refuah has a fixed amount, nisrapes miksuvasa, that if it's a fixed amount, then we deduct the cost of what we owe her from her ksuba. Your ksuba used to be 200 zuz, but in order for you to get your daily regimen of antibiotics, of beta blockers, whatever you're normally taking, because it's katsuv, because it's a fixed amount, so we don't take that out of the Yerusha, we take that out of the ksuba. However, she'ein la kitzva, if there's a medical treatment that doesn't have a fixed price, we don't know how much it is. Let's say it depends how complex the procedure is, whatever, it depends on the treatment. So then harehi kimizonos. Then the halacha is that it's like mizonos, and that comes even from the yorshim, even from the estate, and not necessarily from the ksuba. Amar Rabbi Yochanan asu hakozas dam be'eretz Yisrael ki refuah she'ein la kitzva. When it comes to Eretz Yisrael, they took hakozas dam. They took hakozas dam in Eretz Yisrael to be like refuah she'ein la kitzva, and a refuah she'ein la kitzva means that the money was not deducted from the ksuba, but rather was deducted from the estate. So if a man, Ruvain, is married to Rachel, and Rachel has hakozas dam, so hakozas dam is considered to not be a price that's kasu. And the Gemara tests Rav Yochanan. Krive de Rav Yochanan. There were some relatives of Rav Yochanan Habu. Havalahu itas abba. There was a stepmother. Somebody had a stepmother in the family. Dehavas tzricha refuah kol yoma. She either was a hypochondriac or had medical issues. She's constantly getting medical care. Asu lekame de Rav Yochanan. They came to Rav Yochanan. The Gemara doesn't even articulate the question, but really the question is, where are we supposed to pay her from? Do we deduct these proceedings? Do we deduct these medical proceedings from her ksuba, or are we obligated to deduct it from the estate? So what does Rav Yochanan say? First long line, third of the way down in Beis and Beis. Amar lahu izilu kutsu le midi lerofe. He says, I know she needs medical care every day. So what you should do is go to the doctor and negotiate a price. And if you go to the doctor and you negotiate a price, now the price is katsuv. And now that the price is katsuv, it's no longer deducted from the estate. Now it's deducted from her ksuba.
Lump sum, maybe.
It doesn't say it's lump sum. It just says to be a fixed price for the treatment. So let's say she needs 365 days of treatment. Every day is $10. So as long as it's katsuv, it's not how you pay. It's that the amount that you need to pay is katsuv. We're only talking about the amount, not the methods of payment. So here the Gemara says, Rav Yochanan came up with a chap. Yeah, we don't normally have akazas dam. Akazas dam typically doesn't. We said that's ain't katsuv. So if she needs akazas dam every day, so then Rav Yochanan comes up with this little shtick. Just go talk to the doctor, negotiate with him. We do this all the time in business. Look, we've been working together so long. Let's either put you on a W-2 or come up with something reasonable so that I'm not overpaying. So fine. Right after this happened, Rav Yochanan felt a little bit of contrition. Amar Rav Yochanan, asinu atzmenu ki orche hadayanim. We made ourselves like the lawyers. And here, this is a reference to a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos where we should not make ourselves like Orchei Adayanim. So it says the Gemara, what was the good news and what was the bad news? Me'ikara my savar, ulevasof my savar. So me'ikara savar, umibisar chaloti salim. I can't turn away from my family. I need to be able to support them, and they're eating away from the estate. And we want to make sure that the money comes out of the ksuba instead of from the estate. So I came up with this chap. However, what was the flip side? Ulevasof savar, adam chashav shiny. I'm an adam chashav, Rabbi Yochanan says about himself. I'm that guy. I'm a dayan. People are allowed to say that they're adam chashav. It's not gaiva to say you're an adam chashav when you're a dayan, when you're a posek, when you're a rav. It's not. You're an adam chashav. That's correct.
Rashi seems to say that like, they agree on a price, and that's going to be the refuah forever. meaning it's fixed.
Yeah.
It's a fixed.
It's a fixed price. Correct. Shekabel alav refuasa olamis bekach bekach. I'll take care of her at this rate.
For-
Bekach.
That's a lump sum.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like sustenance.
Yeah. So it seems from the Gemara not that way. It seems from the Gemara that it's not a lump sum, but that it's just a fixed price. This Mishnah is very rare. We're halfway down Nun Beis and Nun Beis. There's a lot of Aramaic in this Mishnah, a bit of a complex Mishnah. And what the Mishnah is going to do is going to discuss a number of cases, clauses that the husband may have left out of the Kesuba. And if he left them out of the Kesuba, what would the halachic implications be? Like we learned yesterday, there are some things that are T'nai Bezdin. And if something's a T'nai Bezdin, even if you're sloppy in your writing and you left something out, it doesn't really matter. You forget to write a ksuba altogether. What did we say? Machlokas, but we said lemaisa that it's going to be the case that a basula will still get 200 zuz if they divorce, and an almana will still get 100. So we're about to learn right now about what's called ksubas benin dichrin. Ksubas benin dichrin was a clause that was added to a ksuba because of the following reason. Let's say that a man wanted to marry a woman, and the man had two wives. So he's got Chana and Penina. So Penina's marrying in as the second wife. But Penina's father really is not ready to dump a huge dowry here, because what happens if his daughter Penina dies? Well, then the huge apartment in Yerushalayim that he gave to his daughter now falls to the husband only. That's normally what happens when a woman dies, is that everything that she has goes to her husband. So Penina's father is very hesitant to put down a big dowry. So that's what the Gemara did here, is it created what's called a ksubas benin dichrin, that if in fact Penina has sons, then the money that Penina's father puts into the dowry, if Penina dies, goes to the son and not to her husband. That's the ksubas benin dichrin. So says the Gemara, lo kosavla benin dichrin di yahavu lechiminai. Let's say that he didn't put the clause in that reads as follows: Benin dichrin di yahavu lechiminai, the boys that you will have from me, inun yartum kesef ksubasayich yeser alchul kehon di'imachuhon, that your boys, Penina, your boys will be able to get the money that your father brings into the marriage more than my other sons from another wife. And let's say he forgets about that, it doesn't matter, because the ksuvas benin dichrin chayev shehu t'nai bezdin, we are always going to assume that that which Penina brought into the marriage in the form of a dowry will go to her children in the event that she dies. So that means if Penina and the husband and Reuven have children, and Chana and Reuven have children, so then this money will not fall to the general pot and divide by all the children. It'll specifically go to the children of Penina. What about the next thing that might well have been omitted? The Gemara says halfway down, 3 lines into this Mishnah, Nun Beis and Beis, Binan Nukvin, if you have daughters, di havin lichi minai, that you have from me, Yahavian Yasvan Bivesi, they can stay in my house, meaning if Penina dies and she has daughters, so Penina's daughters can stay in the house of Reuven, Umitzanan Minachasai, they can be sustained from my nechasim until they've been taken by a man. So let's say that this clause was not put into a ksuba, the husband forgot to write it into the ksuba. Do we then say because he forgot to do it, therefore he's not obligated to take care of the daughters of Penina after his wife Penina dies? Says the Gemara, no, it's still not the case. Rather, Chayev will say that he is obligated to take care of them. Shehu t'nai bezdin. Good, that's the second clause. Here's the third clause. What if he forgot to say the following? Atehe yasva bebesi, you, Reuven says to Penina, in the case that Reuven dies, her husband dies, you can stay in my house, umitzina minachasai, and you can be fed from my property, from my estate, Kol yemei megar almanusayich, for as long as you are an almana bebesi, no problem. What if he forgot to put that in and then Reuven dies and she's an almana? Is she allowed to then benefit from the properties of her husband from the estate? Says the Gemara, even if he forgets to put it into the ksuba, doesn't matter. Chayev, shu t'nai bezdin. And in fact, kach hayu anshe Yerushalayim kosvin, anshe Galil, hayu kosvin kanshe Yerushalayim. These two locales of Yerushalayim and the Galil, they used to write all of these clauses. We don't have them now. We don't have these clauses in our ksuba. They are t'nai bezdin, but we don't have them in our ksuba. Anshe Yehuda hayu kosvin. And in regards to the locale of Yehuda, they used to write a little bit different about the almana. They used to say, you can stay in my house until the Yorshin give you your 200 zuz or your 100 zuz, whatever the case may be. Lefichach, therefore, imratzu Yorshin, nosin laksubaso potronosa. If they want, they can exempt themselves, give up the 200 zuz, $10,000, whatever it is. And then you no longer have to feed her, but you have to do one or the other. So Yerushalayim and the Galil had one language, and the locale of Yehuda had yet another. Amar of Yochanan Mishum Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and this line will become important on the top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. These names of Reb Yochanan in the name of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Why is it that the Chachamim instituted a clause to be added, an addendum to be added to a ksuba? Because Adam lebito kibno. The concern was that Penina's father would not want to write a big dowry for her because he's afraid that if his daughter Penina dies and he says, I'm giving you my multi-million shekel apartment in Yerushalayim, and then his daughter dies, that his father and all of his descendants have lost all of the rights to this apartment, because when Penina dies, her properties default to Reuven, to her husband, and he wasn't willing to do that. So they made it so that in the event that Penina has kids, has boys, that at least if she were to die, then the Yerushalayim apartment would not fall to the general class of kids that Reuven has, but only to the kids that Penina and Reuven have. So therefore it stays in the family. Says the Gemara, how can you have such an idea? Really, where should the money have gone? It should have gone to the general pot for all of the Yorshim. Could there be a case scenario where the Torah says that the son inherits and the daughter doesn't? And you're going to have a case scenario where the money goes through to Penina? That's just not the way things work. That's not the way the Torah is structured. It's not the way the Torah articulates the halachos of inheritances. So how can we have an addendum, an added clause to our ksuba that seems to go in the face of the general principles of Yerusha? We typically assume that Yerusha goes through the son. Here we have this loophole that in the event that Penina dies, so great, but the money still goes to Penina's family. So says the Gemara, that's not right. It's not correct. Really, we have to take care of Penina as well. Hanami deoraisa. It's also deoraisa to take care of her 2/3 of the way down, maybe a little bit more. Nun beis, amud beis, a little bit more than halfway through the thick lines. Dechsiv. How do we know there's a din deoraisa to take care of the women? Says the Gemara, kichu nashim. Men should marry women, and they should have children. You should take sons for your for nashim. You should take women for your sons, and you should be willing to give your daughters in marriage to other men. So says the Gemara, I understand that there can be an upper hand from the men's side of things, bidei kaime, because it's usually the men, the father's side, the groom's side that really does the negotiating. That makes sense. Ela binate, but when it comes to the ladies, mikaiman biyade. We live in a little bit more of a progressive culture where women may chase the resume, but it wasn't like that back in the day. The men really had the upper hand. Just still, in some ways, still true nowadays, but whatever the case may be. So it says the Gemara, what do we learn from here? We need to dress them, we need to cover them. We have to take care of them in order to set them up so that people will marry them. Be'ad kama, asks the Gemara, how much of a dowry is a father supposed to give? What's considered a normative amount? Wow. 10%. Now, when you're poor, no big deal. But when you're very, very wealthy, 10% of a dowry is a lot. But it says odd. You don't have to give that amount. You can give less, and it can be negotiated, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's a lot of cash. Odd.
Right. So
Yeah.
you can give
No,
whatever they
I'm just
want.
saying it's a lot of money. If you're a billionaire, then you're talking some serious cash.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Trust me, the billionaires are not. They're not giving $100 million to their kids. I'm just saying it's you guys. I said the same thing you did. It's odd. It's up to, and it doesn't have to be that much, and it has to be done b'chachma. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Well, we're going to see a story right now about people being guilted into giving all of their wealth. So let's just wait one moment. Says the Gemara, if in fact we're dealing with a Kesubos b'nindichrin, this clause that's been added to ensure that Penina's father will donate to the cause, that if it's going to be the fact that her father is going to be involved and she'll get that Yerusha, then maybe the Baal lo liros, then she shouldn't get her Kesuba. Pick one. So it says the Gemara that doesn't work either, because the father would then also water down his ksubas b'nin dichron. He'll water down the dowry because he'll know that the husband's going to go short on the ksuba. So that's all. That's a catch-22. So we need everyone to stay in place. Then the Gemara says, maybe only when the father writes a ksubas b'nin dichron, that's when the father should include it in his ksuba. But if the father is not going to be giving a dowry, then maybe lo lichtov bal, maybe the husband should then not include this clause. Says the Gemara, we can't do that. Lo plug rabbana. Every ksuba has to have in it a ksubas b'nin dichron. Fine. Says the Gemara, bas bein habonim. What if there's a daughter among sons? Nami terus. Maybe the girls should also inherit. Namely, if we have a ksubas b'nin dichron, that Penina's father will now give a nicer dowry, so that when Penina, in fact, dies, that the money goes to her son, can it also go to Penina's daughters? Says the Gemara, no. The principle of ksubas b'nin dichron was kenachal shiur rabbanim. It follows the basic principles of nachla, of inheritance, and it goes to boys and not to girls. What about bas bein habanos terus? What if Penina only has girls? Remember, the name of this clause is Kesubos b'nin dichron. We're only about boys. So this clause that allows for Penina's father to give a bigger dowry, so that if Penina dies, that the money can stay in the family. So maybe what if she only has 5 girls, 10 girls, like the Bnos Tzlavchad, right? So what about if they're only girls? It says the Gemara, lo plug rabbanan, doesn't matter. We're not allowing the Kesubos b'nin dichron to go to Penina's daughters. It can only go to Penina's sons. Let's say, in regards to the Kesubos b'nin dichron, maybe we can say that one is allowed to collect even from metaltalin, because it's not really a regular ksuba. It's a clause within a ksuba. Says the Gemara, no, ksuba shaviu rabbanan, and that, as we learned in the previous plot, is only from karka, only from things that have achrayas on them, but not from metaltalin. Titrov mimishabde, maybe we'd be able to collect the monies of the Kesubos b'nin dichron from properties that were sold. Says the Gemara, Yartun Tnan, it's only talking about a Yerusha, and a Yerusha cannot be collected from sold properties. Ve'ema afal gav deleka mosar dinar. Every one of these lines is a day of learning. I'm just saying, like, there's a lot here. There's a lot packed here. It's a hard Gemara, but we're learning it on the top level. But there's a lot here. So if you're looking for a meaty Gemara, this would be one. So it says the Gemara, maybe we should say afal gav deleka mosar dinar. What does this mean? So the rule is that when we have the Kesubos b'nin dichron, we only add this clause when the amount of money left over after paying out a ksuba still keeps over a dinar. However, if the balance of money from the family is less than a dinar, Kesubos b'nin dichron is dissolved. There's just like a safety clause. There's such a small amount of money, we're not going to be going any further. Says the Gemara, we can't do that. But makom dekame akra nachla doraisa lo takinu rabbanan. Can't be that way, because then you're already messing with the dispersions, not the dispersions, the disbursements. Thank you. The disbursements of the actual ksuba itself. We're talking about actual nachala at this point. We are not allowed to mess with that, and therefore lo takinu rabbanan. And now the Gemara tells us a story about a Kesubos b'nin dichron. Rav Papa Yasik le'lebrei be'Abasura. Rav Papa and Rav Papa's son got engaged to the daughter of Abasura. They were actually related to one another distantly. Azil l'nichtav la ksubasa. So they went. They were. So I think Rashi here discusses that. Rashi says Be Abba Surah. What? What's on Lamites? Yeah. So that if you look at Rashi, ki be'abasura chamav haya, that's his father-in-law. V'hisi Rav Papa libno achos ishto. So Rav Papa, what is it? Achos ishto. Yeah, his son to his sister-in-law. Very good. So, anyways, they're going to write the ksuba. Azil nichtav la ksubasa. And then Shama Yehuda bar Meremar heard what was going on, and he was excited for Rav Papa. Nafak Asa, he went out to see what was going on. He's chazile, and he saw Rav Papa, and they walked together. They were talking and learning. Kimatu lepischa. When they got to the house of Beisura, of Abasura, so then Havakam Niftar Miname. Rav Yehuda, Rashi says Yehuda Natal Rishus Rav Papa Lachzor La'achora. Rashi says he requested reshus or took reshus, took permission from him to kind of not go inside. So says the Gemara, Chazia de lo hava nichale, top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. He saw that Yehuda was uncomfortable. Rav Papa saw Yehuda was uncomfortable. Omar le, Rav Papa says to him, "My daitech, what are you concerned about? Is it mishum to Amar le Shmuel to Rav Yehuda? Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, Shinana, sharp one, lo tehavi be'avuri achsanta. Don't be at these crossroads of the transfer of a ksuba. Afilu mi barabisha lebrotava. Even if you're going from a quote unquote bad child to a good child, lo yadana maizara nafik mine. We have no idea which child is going to be great and which child is not. So says the Gemara, if that's your concern, all of this is considered to be what Rav Yochanan said in the name of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. That was the opening words of the Gemara on the bottom of Nun Beis Amud Beis, which is code word for Kesubos ben Indichrin. So therefore, if we have this idea of Kesubos ben Indichrin, so then why was Yehuda uncomfortable to go in as Rav Papa was going to negotiate with Abba Surah? So says the Gemara, Omar Le, Yehuda says back to Rav Papa, Hani mili midaite. That's true that we have a Kesubos ben Indichrin when everyone is on the same page. I agree with you. But le'asuye nami, is it also true when you force someone? This language of asuye is stolen from another area in Shas. We have this principle called a get meusa. A get meusa is a get that's forced. Here also, this language of asiya is a language of forcing. So Yehuda Bar Meremar was concerned that Rav Papa was planning on forcing Abba Surah to have this Kesubos ben Indichrin. Amar le atu mika aminalach de'ol ve'asiya. You think I'm going to go in there, be a bull in a china shop? Absolutely not. I'm not going to force anyone to do anything. Ol ve'lo te'asiya kamin. I'm not going to force them. Amar le me'iloi didi hainu asiya. If I go in there, says Yehuda, he understood his standing in the community. He knew if he walked in there that it was going to be a pressure on these people to write something good. Anyways, Rav Papa forced him v'ol, and Yehuda also ended up going into the room. Ishtik v'yasiv. He sat quietly. He didn't say boo. He sat there in the corner in the recliner. He grabbed the Gemara off the shelf and didn't say a word. Savar, the Balabayis, Abba Surah, was sitting there watching Yehuda not speak. And Savar, he thought, Hahu mirtach rotach, that he was upset because they were talking about how much money to put into the ksuba and the Kesubos ben Indichrin. And he thought, so fine, he was nervous. So kasve lekol mai dahavale, down to every last blessed penny. The man wrote away his whole entire future for his daughter because he was afraid that Yehuda Bar Meremar was upset at him that he wasn't giving enough. Lisov, after he finally wrote, he said out loud, okay, I'll give over all of my money in earshot just to make sure that Yehuda Bar Meremar could hear. Lisov Amar le, come on, Yehuda, hashta nami lo mishtaimar, you're still not speaking to me. Because he misread the circumstance. He thought Yehuda Bar Meremar was sitting there silent, and that was the cold shoulder for him not giving enough money in the ksuba. So he says, how can you be upset at me? I haven't left over anything, Yehuda. I've given everything I wanted to. So Amar le Yehuda finally closes the Gemara and he looks up and he says, if you would have consulted me, afilu hai nami de kasvis lo nichali. I'm uncomfortable with the amount of money you're giving in the first place. I wasn't quiet because of that. I was just quiet because I didn't want to be involved. I didn't want to be here in the first place, or if Papa forced me. Amar le, so the Balabais, he sees a window of opportunity to get some of his money back. Smart guy. He says, well, hashtanami, hadari. Well, if what you're saying is that I gave a little bit too much, do you think I should scale back a little bit? So there, Yehuda Bar Meremar was not ready to go so far. Amar le shavya nafshecha hadrona lo ka'amina. I'm not telling you should go back. Keep it as it is. You've done more than your fair share. So Kesubos ben Indichrin was a real thing. This was something that was negotiated in fair territory. It was primarily the case with multiple wives, but it was even technically true, even if there was only one wife. But if the wife were to have died, and then the father's dowry would never to be seen again in his family's line because he gave it away. Okay. Let's talk about this a little bit more. Let's say that a woman, she's pressed for cash and she says, I know that you would owe me 200 zuz. As my ksuba document is like a lien document because you owe me 200 zuz, but I need 100 zuz right now. I'm willing to sell you my ksuba for 100 zuz. So let's say she sells her ksuba. Says the Gemara, what then happens with the Kesubos ben Indichrin? The regular ksuba is 200 zuz. Do we say yesh la Kesubos ben Indichrin or ein la Kesubos ben Indichrin? Yes or no? So it says the Gemara almost halfway down on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Why are you asking about a case where she sells it? You should be asking about a case where she was just mochel it for no money. Says the Gemara, that's ridiculous. The reason why we're asking about a case of mocheres is because she may have felt pressured. She didn't have a choice. She had people who were knocking on the door. You got to pay your credit cards today, and if you don't, we're taking your car, we're taking your house. Says the Gemara, that maybe she was forced because of monetary pressures. She can say, I've been hit 100 times with this special kind of whip. So if we're asking the question there where she was forced to sell her ksuba, so then you think if she gives away her ksuba, she's still going to have the ksuba spinendichren. So Rava is really the only one talking here, but he framed a little Q&A for himself, and he answers as follows. So my Rava, pshitali. It's obvious to me that mocheres ksubas la'acherim yesh la ksubas b'nin dichrin. That if in fact a woman does sell her ksuba to another person, then she also still does have the clause of ksubas b'nin dichrin. My time up because zuzei ansua. The reason why is because we assume that the reason why she sold her ksuba, her rights to the ksuba, was because she didn't have a choice. She needed the cash. What about mochelas? What if a woman says, "I'm fine, I'm fine with the ksuba. I don't care for the money." In that case, ksubas alabayla. If she's mochelas ksubas alabayla, so then the Gemara says, Rava assumes ein la ksubas b'nin dichrin. My time achule achilta, because she's undercut everything. She's done. She nullified. She profaned her whole entire star. The whole thing is done for. So that's Rava's distinction, is that if in fact a woman is mocheres, she feels compelled to sell her ksuba because she needs fast cash right now. I'll sell you for 7 pennies on the dollar, 70 cents on the dollar. Fine. So then in those cases, then she still gets the ksuba b'nin dichrin, she still captures that clause. Masha ein kain, if she's mocheles, so mocheles is different. Mocheles is literally just saying, I don't care about my ksuba anymore. There, in addition to the ksuba being batel, she also loses the ksuba b'nin dichrin. 2/3 of the way down, boy Rava, mocheres ksubasa labayla. When she in fact does buy her ksuba at 70 cents on the dollar, is it kemocheres la'acherim dami? Is it like she sold it to others, in which case she would still have some rights? Kemocheles labayla dami. Or is that like giving it over to her husband, in which case she may not have rights? Basar de baya hadar pashta. He answered the question on his own. Another Rava talking to Rava scenario. Mocheres ksuba labayla kemocheres la'acherim dami. That when one is mocheres her ksuba to her husband, it's as if she sold it to somebody else. Let me just look up a quick Rashi here. Mocheres labayla. Yeah, we're talking here about tovas hano, about any other benefits of things that were in the ksuba. Okay, says the Gemara, this is not so simple. We're 8 lines before the wide lines. Masiv Ravidi Barabin. Hold on 1 second. We learned the Gemara in Maseches Yevamos. There we had said that Mesa, if a woman died, ein yorshin shalzeh, vein yorshin shalzeh, yorshin ksubasa. Nobody gets her ksuba, but that was a very strange language because v'havinan b'ksubasa mayavite. We had already spoken about ksuba earlier in that Mishnah over there in Maseches Yevamos. Why does it speak about a ksuba twice? So over there we answered v'amar papa ksubas b'nin dichrin. We said that nobody gets the ksubas b'nin dichrin. Yet over here we said that if she's mocheres the ksuba to someone, then it's as though she was mocheres it to somebody else, and then she still has the rights to the ksubas b'nin dichrin, the tovas hano. So it says the Gemara, that doesn't make sense because the Gemara in Yevamos says that ksubas b'nin dichrin was one of the things she doesn't get. V'amai hachanami over there in that case lema yetzer ansa. That case and what was going on over there in Maseches Yevamos, maybe we should say that there's a yetzer, just like we said over here that there's zuzei ansuha. Maybe we should say the cases are similar. Says the Gemara, no hasam knasahu de kansura, but you can't compare the case that was going on over there in Yevamos with our case over here. Yasiv Ravin Bar Chanina Kamed Rav Chizda. He was sitting in front of Rav Chizda. Yasiv Kamar Mishmed Rav Elazar, and they were talking and learning about the following. Mochelas ksubasa labayla. Now we're talking about mochelas. A woman just says, I have no interest in the ksuba from you at all. So then, in addition to losing her ksuba, she also has no more food from her husband's estate. She's done. Once she's mochelas the ksuba, she is done for. Omar Lei, he says to him, wow, that's really shocking. If I didn't hear from you that this came from someone great, hava amina Havamin Allah, I would have thought that's not the right way to behave. You really should continue feeding her, but you said it in the name of someone great. Yasiv Rav Nachman v'Ula v'Avimi bar Rav Papi v'Yasiv Rav Chia bar Ami Gabayu. There, Rav Ami was sitting there too. Asahu Gavra d'Shchiva Arusaso. A man shows up and he says, Nebuch, his fiance had died. What did they respond? I'm so sorry to hear that. Amrele, they said to him, Zil Kavar, you should need to go bury her. Oh, or Havla Ksuvasa, or you have to pay her Yorshim for the Ksuba, one of the two. She's an Arusa. Remember, she's an Arusa. It's a little bit strange. The Gemara says, Amar Lahu Rav Chia, hold on one second, Tanina. Ishto Arusa, we learned this in Maseches Yevamos as well, I believe. Yeah. Ishto Arusa, if a man's wife was only halachically betrothed, lo onain velo mitmala, you're not an onain, and if you're a Kohen, you cannot become tamei for her. V'chein he and she as well, if he dies, lo onenes velo mitamalo, mesa enu yorsha, mesu govak subasa. And says the Gemara, time of the mesu. The reason why is because he died. So it's implied from here that there should be no ksuba. So why is it that when this man walked into the Beis Medrash, walked into Bezdin and he said that his fiance has died, that they said you have to either bury her or give a ksuba? That's not true. We had said in Maseches Yevamos that she doesn't have to pay ksuba. My taima, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, she'einani koreba lecheshe tinasi la'achar sitli mashe kasuv lichi, because we can't fulfill in this particular case that we are going to give you what was left because she died. So therefore, the case seems to be as the Gemara had presented, that we have, it's not so pashut over here, that my taima is because we weren't able to apply that when they get married, that she can take whatever belongs to him. And kiyasa ravin amar reish lakish arusa shemesa ein laksuba. This also seems to be the case of ein laksuba. Amar lahu Abaye, he says, you're a little late to the party. Zilu amar le, go back and say to them, as we turn to the top of Gimel Amud Beis, shkilu tivusach shaja chizrit. Go take your good Torah and go throw it on the thorns. You're late to the party. Somebody already had that chiddush. Thank you very much. After all, Kvar Tirgama Rav Hoshaya Lishmaisa b'Bavel. We already learned about this in Bavel, that a woman who is an Arusa who dies, no ksuba. We had said in our Mishnah, one of the clauses that could have been added to a ksuba but was not, was Benan Nukvan de Yehavyan Lichim, that a man would say that any of your daughters, he would say to Penina, if you have any daughters, I'll feed them until they get married. So the Gemara wants to know, what does it mean? How long do we have to hold on to these girls? How long is he on the hook to feed the daughters? So if you're a mensch, you'll feed them forever. But what's the halachic minimum? Says the Gemara. I should say, what's the halachic maximum, not the halachic minimum. Says the Gemara, Rav Tani ad tilkachan leguvrin, till they get married. The Levi Tani ad de tibgiron, until they become a bogeres, until they become of age. Does that mean the Rav Afal Gav de Bagar or the Levi Afal Gav de Insi? Do they not hold of each other's shitas? That doesn't really make a lot of sense, because you could have scenarios where a woman is a bogeres and not married. You could have a scenario where a woman is married and not a bogeres. So how can they be mutually exclusive? Says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. Ella, 5 lines down on Nun Gimel Amud Beis, we're going to be learning until 2/3 of the way down. Bagar velo insi. If a woman became physically mature in age, velo insi, and she was not married, or insiv velo bagar, or she got married and she still was not a bogeres, to kule alma lo pligi, that in that case they're no longer obligated to feed her. In that case, the daughters of Penina no longer get the rights of the estate. Ki pligi be'arusa velo bagar. What happens if you have a girl who's an arusa and she's 10? Is that girl subject to the requirements to feed her? That's the machlokas between Rav and Levi. V'chein tani Levi b'masnise. Levi actually articulates this. Ad tivgeron v'yimte zmanehon de insivan. Says the Gemara, Tarte, do we need both of these features? No. Ella o tivgeron o yamte zmanehon leisnasba. That they have to have one or the other. And kitanoi, this actually reflects a different machlokas in the Tanoim. What is this different machlokas? A quarter of the way down on Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Ad masay habas nizonis, how long does a daughter get fed for? Ad sheteyares, until she gets halachically betrothed. Says the Gemara, Mishum Rebbe Lazar Amru, Ad shetibager. Here it says not only erisin, but even tibager, that they have to be a little bit older, so they get fed, presumably, even a little bit longer. Tani Reb Yosef, Ad yahavyan, until they reach Havaya. That's a problem, because Havaya is used in multiple ways. Says the Gemara, Havaya de erisin or Havaya de nisuin. What are we talking about? Halachic betrothal or halachic marriage? Says the Gemara, Teika, we don't know the answer to that question. One more little sugya. Amar le Rav Chizda le Rav Yosef, Mishlialach mi shmialach minei de Rav Yehuda. Arusa yesh lamazonos o ein lamazonos. There's an arusa, part of the obligations of a husband to feed her, yes or no. So we'll see two different iterations of this Gemara. Here's version number 1. Says the Gemara, Amar le, mashma lo shmieli. I did not hear anything explicit. Elamistabra leslay. But it seems to me that it is not his formal obligation to feed an arusa. Kevan de Irsa, once the man actually gets engaged to her, lo nichale de teistzil. He doesn't want her to be such a bizayon. So of course he'll instinctively say, I married this pretty girl. I want her to stay full. I want her to stay satiated. I want her to be able to buy whatever she wants. I'll give her access to the credit card. And that was just by his own volition. Amar le, he says, well, hold on one second. Mishma lo shmielach. If you really didn't hear anything at all, then maybe misvara islay. Maybe we should assume that there is an obligation that he should support his arusa with food. Kevan de lo kimle bigava, since that marriage is not a done deal yet, until the fathers work out all the finances, until all the details are worked out. Lav dafka that everyone who's in arusa, we know from broken engagements, lav dafka that everyone who's in arusa becomes a nesua. So says the Gemara, kevan de lo kimle bigava, because he's not 100% sure that they're going to get married, lo shadi zuzi bichti, he's not going to throw away money. So if we see that there's a husband who, a fiance, betrothed man, who is feeding his betrothed wife, his fiance, we should fairly assume that he has a strong halachic obligation to feed her. Otherwise, he's gambling, because there's no way to get that money back once you spend it. There's no teeth in halacha to pull that money back. So we therefore assume that if he's going to be feeding her, it's because he is obligated to. Vika de amre, that it was the other way around. Amar le mishma lo shmieli. I haven't heard about this. Misvara islay says the opposite svars, that kevan de lo kimle begava, because it's not a guarantee that you're going to get married. Lo shadi zuzi bichti. And Amar le, the response back to him was mishma lo shmielach, maybe misvara leis like kevan de irsa lo nichale de tesa, because he's not doing this out of obligation. He just doesn't want her to turn a corner and look less pretty. So he's feeding her, but he may not have an obligation. So the Gemara concludes here with a machlokes as to whether or not an arusa is obligated to feed an arus is obligated to feed his arusa. Eitza tova, if you're engaged, take out your credit card, take the girl to dinner, and get yourself above this machlokes. Because at the end of the day, we have to remember that what we're discussing in the Gemara, a lot of these cases seem very cold when you read them. We have to remember that these are technical dinim. When you're in the realm of bein adam lachavero, these are mamanis shadows. But bein adam lachavero, we always take the high road. We'll stop right here. Tomorrow we'll pick up with Siman, 2/3 of the way down, learning Daf and Daled. Wishing you all a beautiful night.